So, hello everybody, and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0. With me is a return and very welcome guest, Mr. Chris Argent, who is the founder of Gen CFO. So, for those of you that haven't heard of Gen CFO, it's an amazing network and recently had a fabulous summit, which I was very proud to be asked to take part of. So, I want to say firstly, thank you to Chris for organising the summit, and thank you for joining me on the show this morning.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. And it was a great chat when we had it, I think midday 2, I think it was. It's all a bit of a blur.
Yeah, I can imagine. We were just talking about 2 days worth of sessions, and there were a lot of great speakers and great sessions, but it must have been incredibly hard work going solid at it for 2 days.
It was, but I really look forward to it. It's one of the sort of flagship events that we have as a community. We kind of trundle along doing our sort of events and our content throughout the year. But actually the summit's when you feel the community and you feel the buzz. There's much more activity on our online platform as well. So you feel like, you're actually making a difference, which is great. It's quite different. And you're right. There were some great sessions on there. Thanks to a lot of the speakers who put their hands up, not just to talk about, transformation or change, but really give opinions, like, some of them fairly controversial opinions, and really sort of poking the bear of the traditional accountant and saying, come on, we need to be doing more. So, yeah, it was great. It was a great summit, great 2 days.
So that's an interesting statement. I was going to ask you what your favorite sessions were, but tell me, before we dig into that, tell me a bit about some of the controversial statements that you heard, or, and views that came out through the summit.
Yeah, I think so. One of the most listened to actually was the Chief Future Officer, led by an all-female panel. It's a really interesting conversation. I think there was no light messaging in that session. It was kind of like, where the hell have you been if you're not investing in transformation, if you're not investing in tech, if you're not taking, this to your team and trying to work on a new org design, whether your ambition is, as a Chief Future Officer, whether it's to be the next CEO or whether it's to just be very good at what you do as a CFO or whatever. It was kind of like you cannot stand still. And I'm quickly looking for a quote here, but it was basically, if you can't stand still. If you are not trying to move forward, then you're going backwards. I actually think that's a bit of an old Japanese proverb, something in there, But Billy O'Connor said it, the CFO and CIO from Milken Moore, and that was really good to hear, because I think a lot of people feel that finance processes and finance teams are fairly sort of fixed and a fairly stable environment, but actually I don't believe that's true anymore. And at the other side of it was Bernd Stangl, who's the CFO from Alcatel, who had quite a provocative session on automation accelerators. Similar sort of messaging around, kind of what you're doing, where have you been? But he sort of said that you need to feel the pain of transformation to actually make change. And I don't think he means physical pain, but I think he means that, he had this phrase that, humans don't like change. Funnily enough, just before I came on here, there was a Deloitte podcast with an expert saying exactly the same thing. Don't go to Deloitte, come to Gen CFO Summit. But that he was saying exactly the same thing, which was, people don't like change. And change to humans is like cats to water and swimming. We don't like doing it. So Bernd's point was, you need to feel the pain to create the motivation to change. So again, some really strong opinions, throughout the whole 2 days, and some of them things that you might not have heard from finance leadership before.
It's really interesting. So obviously doing what we do, implementing systems, we tend to hear from people that already recognize that there's a need for change. They know that something needs to change. How widespread do you think, based on your experience, the CFOs and, senior finance people aren't in that place where they know that they need to continuously develop and change their processes and systems? Do you think it's a common feeling, or do you think that, as the guy said, that if you're, where have you been, is that if you aren't doing that?
So I think publicly, if you asked anyone, it's like, oh, I'm a transformational leader, I'm leading change, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, whatever. I think the reality is that there's a whole spectrum of where people are at as leaders with this. And what I'm seeing is a disconnect between people who want to do and people who want to get on with it, which are normally the people who can't make that final budget decision. But those people are kind of a little bit opposed to their leaders. And this is kind of anecdotal. I don't have a percentage, but that would be lovely, like 30% of leaders are doing this and 70% aren't. But I see it in terms of, we get asked questions like, how can I persuade my boss? What if my boss doesn't understand the difference between, automation and analytics? What if my boss isn't prepared to support me with digital finance training or digital transformation training or tools training? So we kind of get that sort of anecdotal job level conversation, which is why I love doing the community. It's very real, versus, people who might go on to, a sort of big four podcast or a big magazine and say, hey, we're making all this transformational change. But in reality, it's just sort of flag waving and sort of town halls. So yeah, I think there's a significant majority of people who are not changing.
And that's really interesting. So where do you see the blocker? Is it in the top person in finance not understanding enough about the need for change? Or is it above them and you're talking board and CEO level?
That's a really complicated question. I'm going to answer it as succinctly as I can, and it is oversimplifying it. But I think that a lot of finance leaders, they don't have training in this area, right? So this isn't a blame game. So they tend to look externally to the business for answers rather than internally, when actually a lot of the knowledge and even a lot of the resourcing now is internal. People are coming into your team with more digital and data skills than ever before, more of an appreciation of what an app should be, or a UX or a data visualization should be now than ever before. So a lot of people, I think, look outside the organizations for strategy rather than looking internally and building culture through people. And there's that phrase, culture eats strategy. I think that's really true about how, transformation in general. Finance leaders can do a lot more to bring people on the journey with them, and also just to learn about this subject, rather than seeing it as something that's outsourced to IT or a consultant. I think the change is so fundamental that this needs to be built into our org structures, into our services as finance teams. It's not just, a quick project to load a tool. And I think that's the other problem. People start with the technology rather than the people and the outcomes. They just like buying licenses. It's easier to sign off a license than it is to sign off, a load of change activity. So, it's complicated, but I think just start with outcomes and people rather than technology and consultants.
I couldn't agree with you more. And that sounds strange, obviously doing what we do, but I have a lot of conversations. I had a really interesting one yesterday, actually, where they were saying they wanted to bring somebody in to do an implementation. So they wanted the way that they were going to resource it was literally to bring someone in to do it. I said, that, in my opinion, is not the right approach, right? You can bring resource in to lift people out of their day jobs, but fundamentally making decisions about a system, understanding a system, going through an implementation is the start of your fundamental tech transformation. It's not going to stop once you finish that project. And if you outsource or try to outsource that, that person doesn't have the knowledge of how your current processes work, of your current business. But secondly, they can't continue the journey once the initial implementation is finished. So, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that, right? Because I have quite a specific opinion, and I've seen it lots of ways. I've seen people resourcing certain aspects of the job, and I think implementation, I think sometimes that can work. But I'm a fundamental believer that you need to build the skills in your team, use perhaps a new person coming in to spearhead it, but they need to be a permanent member of staff, or certainly for the foreseeable 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. It's taking the team with you. It's leading with credibility. It's, feeling that this is change happening internally rather than done to from outside. It's, hopefully that person is sort of respected so that people can get around them and they can share ideas and they can ideate and they can come up with outcomes, that they're happy with, they feel they're going to make a change, because all that needs to motivate. The way it used to be done is, you bring in a tool, they work in isolation, they do a few rounds of readiness or training, and then they say, well, there you go, adopt it. It's over to you to adopt this amazing tool that we've bought. And, we've seen the stats, right? I think, these are large transformations, but, 78% of large transformations fail for exactly these reasons. And I think there's an inherent approach that we need to work against. And the inherent approach, as I see it at the moment, is that we ask ourselves, do we have the technology? Oh, no, we don't have the technology, so we'll go and buy the technology. Okay, are our processes aligned to that technology? No, okay, we got to go and fix the processes. Now, do we have the right people? So let's get the right people involved. And then at the very end, they're starting to look at, outcomes and how we can fix things for you with our great bit of tech. And I actually think, and this is part of our Flip training, the reason why it's called Flip is that we actually turn that totally on its head. And the thought process needs to be outcomes. So what are we delivering to our customers internal and external? Can we deliver fundamental change through people? Yeah, transformation through people. How does the business operate? That's processes. And then the actual last piece is, how do we integrate the technology? Yeah, so we're trying to train people now after literally thousands of hours of conversations over the last 10 years to work in the completely opposite way that they probably naturally work, but it's for all these reasons that we're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. And it's really interesting. So when I go in, so we tend to have two different types of projects that we work on. So one are those traditional technology implementations, but others are more process orientated, I would say. And one of the fundamental pieces I find really interesting is when we go in, is that people don't understand the value of process and understanding the value of challenging process at the beginning of a technology implementation. Because I've seen so many people try to shoehorn bad processes into tech. And I'm like, let's address this. If you can't get data out of your other systems or, in a decent format, how are you going to do an integration in the first place? If the data that's being entered badly because of your choice of process or how you go about things doesn't work, how can you use that data effectively for analytics? How can you automate it? Fundamentally, in my, a bad process is, automated is still a bad process. It doesn't matter whether you're using tech or not. So, to
use an example of, the natural way of working, let's call it, which is flawed, right? It would be, okay, what automation technology is out there because I need to automate my processes? Okay, you go and get an automation technology. That tends to be the starting point for a lot of people because you can sign off a budget and a license and it's nice and easy. Then they look at the processes and they say, oh shit, the processes aren't actually what we want. So if we start automating those processes, it's speeding up a broken wheel. Oh, we better go and fix the processes. Who understands the processes? Oh, the users, the process owners. So we better go and start talking to the people. And then when you start sitting down and talking to the people, they're like, well, actually, I don't care about the technology. I just want to make my customer happy. I want my job to be better. I want, to make sure that I've got a bit of technology that I really enjoy using. So unfortunately, that sort of natural way of working works against us. Like I said, take the same example and do it completely the opposite way around, right? Go to the teams and ask them what they want. What's going to drive value for the customers? Oh, a faster process, more data, more sort of better decision making off the data that we've got. Okay, how do we do that? Well, we've got to get the right people in the room. They need to bring up the ideas. They need to talk about the process. They need to tell us what they want. Then go fix the process, then go automate. And I think people like shiny new toys and they go chasing the technology. But if you talk to people who have installed the technology like you, the technology isn't the problem. It's been installed probably thousands of times before, implemented into teams hundreds and thousands of times before. So that's not the issue. Our way of working is an issue. And that's really behind the sort of the training that we're trying to bring in, which is a facilitated learning. It's not textbook. It's like, right, let's talk about it. Let's come together as peers. Let's learn from each other using this flipped approach, as we call it.
And I think there is a piece where technology can inspire process, right? So sometimes process issues can be driven because people have had to work within a certain remit, within a certain technology, right? So absolutely, technology can inspire best practice, and certainly if you speak to a good consultant, and I believe this, and I think more technology consultants should be supporting customers with this, but they should be able to help you understand what you could do, right? And how your process could work. But fundamentally, the architecture that sits around that process needs to be enabled before you implement the technology. And I think that's the challenge, is people going, great, right, I understand how I want it to look, but have I set the wider business up to support this best practice, this process? And that's where I see a lot of failures happen, in that they haven't thought about, well, this is going to involve, other departments. Are they ready for change? Have they understood the need for change? Are they agreed with the change? I've gone into projects where I've been asked to implement controls. And the first question I ask before I even go into there is, well, how do you want your controls to work? What's your policy around authorization limits, around what's your process that you need it to follow? And they haven't made those decisions. So we're looking, and in those instances, we quite, at the beginning stage say, right, go and sort your policy out. Here are some options for you that you can use, but we can't implement a change until you have made decisions about how and what you need the process to look like.
But I can see how that happens. But from your experience, what are they more ready to buy? The technology and the licenses and the implementation, or the people change and the change management and maybe some process mapping, process re-engineering?
100%. When we go into conversations, there's more debate about implementation costs than there is about technology costs, which I find fascinating, right? I see the value of an implementation as being the services that get wrapped around it, the skills that we bring into that team. But those that have been through an implementation before, so you can see a clear difference. Those that have done this before, they want to know how we change, how we're going to support them, what options they can choose from in terms of data migration. They understand what's involved. Those that are new to implementations, they're the ones that they try to push and cut on the professional services rather than stagger their technology costs. And I find that really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. For some reason, and we do need to flip this, right? We need to understand that change is about bringing your teams with you, your people with you. Transformation is another level where we're changing our org structures, we're changing our capability, but we're only going to make that change. As Bernd said, if we feel a bit of the pain, if we're the cat that jumps into the water, it's, we have to accept that the change is about, understanding outcomes, working with people, and then probably the more traditional elements of transformation, which is, the processes and the technology. And, there's so much research on this now. I think it's just a lack of education generally, and some bad habits, some, bad behavior. Like, we've got IT procurement in most large enterprises, but do we have the same focus on, change management procurement or, people procurement? Who owns that element of change? Is it HR? Is it a PMO? Is it, IT? So it's complicated, but I think that's even more the reason why we need to learn more about this, which is why, Digital Finance Function Awards give you a little plug. This podcast is shortlisted, and so is your Finance Transformation Live webinar series, because this is all about educating people to do the right things, not about flogging more licenses, which I'm sure is part of your business, but it's not. That's not the only goal, right? Successful implementation is.
And that's the point, right? So that's why I started, and thank you so much for the mention and the nomination, to be very fair. But that's why I started Financial Transformation Live, because there are so many things that you can do in your existing software and or to make your new software implementation more effective. Like, I've done sessions on process mapping, right? Because to your point earlier, Chris, trying to get people to sign off to send people on training for process mapping is really hard, because it seems easy, but there's a skill set in running process mapping workshops. So, and I've run those with customers before, for those that really understood the value of getting things, getting that done and getting it done well. But part of what I'm trying to do with those financial transformations is literally to give basically a condensed version of information just to get people on the right track. Because the reality is as you say, technology works, and it works extremely well. It can drive amazing change when it's done in conjunction with people and process. When you're having good conversations with your team up front, you're planning out your project, when you're making sure that your processes are, and you know what your processes are. So all of these things have to happen to make the technology successful. And it's why I don't see us as a software vendor. I don't see us as selling software. So for me, technology is a tool that we use to deliver a result, but I see us as a consultancy that just happens to use Sage technology. And that's very different, I think, to how other people in our industry see themselves.
Which is great. And I think, a lot of what I'm talking about, a lot of what you're talking about is a relatively new thing that, which I think, again, people need to sort of understand and educate themselves on. That if you came to me 10, 15 years ago, I would have said probably, implementing technology as it was fine, because it probably felt like an upgrade to an existing platform or a different tool that was quite similar to the one before. So there was very little process change, very little people change. There may have been a bit of restructuring if it was in shared services environments and stuff like that. But really, fundamentally things weren't changing that much. You were just moving the licenses around. The reason why I feel that we need to take this flipped approach is because this is changing the way that we can operate. The capability of automation, analytics, greater agility, like Zoom and Teams, and Slack and Monday and all that good stuff. that is fundamentally changing how we can operate. And I think that just means that we are going on very different transformation journeys to, implementation journeys that we did 10 years ago. And I think sometimes that can be lost in this conversation. It's like, oh, they're talking about tech. Well, actually, we're not. We're talking about how you change your operations. You have a successful transformation. And, we talk about the awards. It's called the Digital Finance Function Awards because I believe that's a sort of end state of this new place. It's something that is really different to the traditional world. And, I mentioned at the start some of the more provocative things that people were saying. In that Chief Future Officer session, they were really calling out traditional accountants who weren't really looking to make change or transformation or to understand the power of sort of data-driven decision making, because they felt they weren't leaning into the business and understanding the business. They were just sat behind their desks doing the numbers. So I think that's the fundamental difference and why it's a sort of learning for the next 12 months rather than something that, it's just an IT problem, someone else will deal with that for me.
But I also think I think you talk about, obviously there was a lot of swapping of licenses around, but I think also the expectation for what we're delivering with these change projects is so much higher. And also there's so much more at stake. So in order for us to deliver on that vision of being, a true partner to the business, integrated finance, digital finance, that is, we have to make this massive leapfrog because there are a lot of finance teams that are not even close to where they need to be able to deliver on that capability. And I think that's the piece that's really changed, is the expectations of the business of finance have changed. In order for finance to get where it needs to be and to get ahead of the expectations of the business and to keep pace with those expectations, is that we have to change a lot and we have to change it quickly, which is why I think the requirement around skill set and transformation is so high right now, specifically.
Yeah. The sort of finance business partnering movement, I think that's brilliant and I welcome it. But I also think that it's, you've got to run before you've got to walk before you can run. There are lots of people saying, oh, you need to go and be a finance business partner and go on finance business partner training and impact training and sales training and communication training and storytelling training, whatever. It's like, yeah, great. But when you get in the room, how are you going to earn your place at the table? Is it by being a great bloke? Is it by talking to the same spreadsheets you've been talking to for 20 years, but just with a slightly different voice? My presenter voice today is, no, it's not that at all. It's coming with decision support. It's becoming with analytics. It's the timeliness of that information. It's the strategic support that you can offer because you've got more time through a different way of working. And it frustrates me when I see finance business partner training that doesn't have anything about technology in it. It's like, how can you talk about, being a business partner, provider of information, provider of strategy, without talking about change of technology? So yeah, I think, there's a lot to do, but going back to the outcomes and the people, to go and talk to the finance business partnering team and find out what all of their issues are when they talk to the business. Because right now, the other thing that a lot of the CFOs said at the summit was, it's on our finance leadership to start doing almost like a PR exercise with the rest of the business. Because if you ask the business now what you want their finance team to be doing, their finance function to be doing more of, they'll say, oh, more reconciliations, they're great at that. More VAT returns, they're great at that. More Excel spreadsheets, they're great at that. So we have to sort of shift the conversation and say, look, we want to be providing a different service to you. Yeah, we want to really earn our seat at the table. And it's not going to be found in transactional processing. It's going to be found in the business partnering space. But we still have to enable the business partners with a different capability to provide value to the business. So it's on that outcomes and people side where all of the work still needs to be done, as far as I'm concerned. And that's not to devalue technology and implementation. I just have a lot of confidence in a lot of good partners out there now, and a lot of good technology out there now. And it's easy for me to promote those people because they do their job. The clients say it, and you can see the user ratings.
Yeah, for me, the measure of success, though, and I think that's the difference, isn't it? It's about driving the outcomes. So what has been the impact of that technology? And maybe this is a topic for another podcast, but it's something that we're working really hard on at the moment internally, is how do we measure and how do we benchmark outcomes? So how do we help people not just at the understand what they want, but also how do they benchmark themselves? How do they hold themselves to the stand, to a higher standard, and also understand where their team is at in the transformation curve. So yeah, that's a whole different topic.
It is a whole different topic. One. And if you do want to do some prep for that, day 2, the morning of day 2 of the summit, we had a brilliant chat, and it was all about, the phrase was embeddedness, and embeddedness as a KPI. So have a listen to that, because we almost tried to define it. It was, I kind of said it's almost like a sales pipeline. Can you sort of work out how many meetings you're having? Can you estimate what you think the conversion might be from those meetings? And then, all the way to purchase, but obviously in our case, it's adoption or it's embeddedness. So I think there is a qualitative way of measuring all that stuff that's very common in other areas of the business. So go and talk to them.
Absolutely. And I think this is exciting. And for us, it's about how do we understand, how do we make sure that whatever we measure, we have obviously the common set of KPIs and metrics, but actually it goes back to what are we trying to achieve? And to your point, Chris, why are we doing this in the first place? What does this business need from this implementation project? And how do we measure that impact? Because sometimes it can be quite hard to measure, right? So we talk about technology as a tool to drive a change in behavior so that we free up time to do other things. But even delivering on those other pieces can take a while to be seen and felt. So, yeah.
But I don't have a number for this, but I wish, again, I could do the research. I need to do more research, I've realised. But when you become a program manager is what I used to be, you do like all the formal training, managing successful programs and things like that. And one of the things that they say that you should do after a transformation is to go and do a benefits realization analysis. But yeah. I don't think that's ever been done on any transformation that I've worked on. Not because of me, but because we're so sort of happy to have launched something and got it live or got it going that you just sort of assume the benefits are there. But actually, a bit more research on the reality of that realization, the embeddedness, the adoption, would actually be really, really good. I'm sure there's some research out there. But yeah, it's a big part of it, because you're right. If I am going to start saying we need to focus on outcomes and people, how do we measure it to know that that is being done properly? Because it's very easy to see whether a user is using a license. Anyway, all good.
Maybe there's something we can work on together from a research perspective, because that's exactly what we're trying to figure out. How do we manage we're one of those continuous improvement kind of organizations. So we're always looking to improve how we do things. So how do we measure our impact on customers according to their measure of us? And that's a whole different conversation. So back on to where we started, which was all about the learnings from the summit. So I wanted to ask you again, was there anything else that really stood out to you in terms of learnings or things that came up again and again that, we need to talk about?
Yeah, I'm just looking at my cheat sheet here because honestly, it's all a bit of a blur. There was so much great conversation, but I'm going to just pull out a few things that other people said. So on the Excel session, which was all a debate about where we were with Excel and Power BI and all the rest of it. So there was a comment: user satisfaction increased when they moved to cloud and machine learning capability. And that was actually a research quote, actually. And that doesn't exist in Excel. So there was a big debate about, how we use Excel, and is Excel going away? And I've got a bottle of whiskey on it in 10 years that we're not using Excel as much as we used to. But I think there's a point to note that when your Excel spreadsheets start to get very large and unwieldy and maybe not on the cloud, and you can't apply some of this new capability, then you're no longer in an Excel world. So that was on the Excel session. We had a Workforce 2.0. Haven't quite got to 4.0 yet, but Workforce 2.0 session. That was quite interesting because it was about sort of lots of different things, but remote working was seen to be breaking down silos, which I hadn't heard before, in that it's very easy to get people onto calls now. Whereas maybe in the past you felt that you had to go to their office or go to, someone else's team, and it was a bit awkward. And that's even amongst finance organizations, large finance organizations, I'm not going to tax or pensions. They're a bit different to us, but you can get everybody on a call quite easily. There was a very real expectation that the analytics translator role, which has been talked about for quite a while, this kind of strategic business partner with analytics, is real, and it's coming, and it's here in some organizations. So they felt that the next part of the journey for us was very much this sort of analytics translator role, which I think is a Gartner phrase that they've used in the past. And yeah, everything transactional is an automation target. Just to leave you with that bombshell.
Love that.
So that was on our automation accelerator. And yeah, just called it out. But I think because of this business focus, this finance business partnering focus, strategic business partnering focus, whatever you want to call it, the logical conclusion is that everything transactional is an automation target. Now, there's a cost benefit analysis to do with every one, every change. But I think if you're starting to think like that, you're going to approach your career quite differently. When I started keying in or even writing up invoices for the bulk of my job, those roles don't exist now, and neither should they. It's boring. So
that's the point, isn't it? Yeah, it's about, I think part of that cost benefit analysis also needs to be about people feeling valued for the work that they do.
Yeah.
And feeling excited about the work that they do.
I don't know many people who put in so much work into their profession to get a qualification who are then happy to do such a rubbish job. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, normally graduation day is because you've earned your wings to go and do a brilliant job. Yeah. It's that Top Gun Maverick moment, right? Yeah. I've got my wings, I'm off. But with us, it's like, oh, well done, you're qualified. Right. Well, start all the way down in the stables with that wheelbarrow, please. Don't get it.
Do you know what? That's a really good way of describing it, Chris. As a horsey girl, right? I feel that. But it is true. And I've always said this, right? We have some incredible people in finance. We have these really talented individuals that have so much knowledge, yet they are still literally typing invoices into spreadsheets.
And that's the culture, right? So culture eats strategy. And if I can get people to be doing great things from, when they enter the workforce rather than rubbish things, then maybe we can get more out of these teams over the next 5-10 years.
Maybe we can keep more of them in finance, right? Because I think we need to, as a community, think about that. If we continue in the way, if we don't change anything, we will find good talent leaving finance. And I think that's something we just all need to think about, is that we want this talent, we need this talent in finance. And if we don't create an environment where they can be challenged mentally and excited about the work they do, then we will lose them, because there is so much opportunity in other areas, in dev, in different parts of the business, that we have to make room for people to be able to step up.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's been a film with Ben Affleck called The Accountant, right? But I don't think there's been many HBO series of accounts departments. There's been plenty of law firms and legal firms, but I'm waiting for the day when that happens, because that will show me that it's a profession of choice. We're doing great things. We're doing interesting things. We're doing things that resonate, rather than just saying, hey, I've got a 90% process rate on my AP invoices. Great. But that's step one.
So we've talked a lot about the vision for finance and where it's going. And I think the reality is that all of this takes education, us learning and building skills within our teams. And from my perspective, I think, and again, it's why I started Financial Transformation Live, was that traditional ways of training people and sharing knowledge, that they're starting to change. And I think that's what's so exciting about the work that you and the team at Gen CFO are doing, Chris, is that you're sharing knowledge, you're sharing best practice. How do you think, what opportunities do you think people are missing in terms of building skills and education within their team?
So, first of all, I just want to correct what you said there. So I don't claim to be the oracle here. I'm not saying, here's the textbook and, I'm going to read the textbook to you. What I think a community is, and our approach, is about peer learning. So this is about getting good people together to have good conversations, but rather than it being kind of top down blue sky thinking and, another Simon Sinek quote, which is all great, but it doesn't really help me in my day job. We try to bring the conversation down to job level. So we would ask questions like, what is your understanding of digital transformation? And then get everyone to share their ideas and, try to make conclusions as a group. So I think what I would say, first of all, is maybe change your approach towards your learning. Especially when you get to a certain level, you might not want to be in a classroom anymore. You might be happier listening to podcasts, which is why they're listening to this, So change your approach to learning. Communities are a really good way of doing that. You're talking to your peers and you're getting very open and honest exchanges. With us, it's over a presentation and a glass of wine, So, but also there are other ways of training, and we take a facilitated learning approach. And I work with a really great guy called Mike Rose, who uses facilitation techniques to actually draw things out of people. So we don't assume that we know everything. We're not trying to be kind of consultants doing training. We're believing that you know what's right for your organization. You probably know what's right for your profession. So let's just stimulate those conversations. And we do them as masterminds monthly. We do it as this flip, digital finance, digital transformation training. And we just do it, generally as part of our online community. So, but yeah, I would just take a sort of slightly different approach to learning. That would be my number one thing.
I think learning through conversation is and through your peers. There is something about, you can read all of the research, and obviously I think both you and I, Chris, spend a lot of time reading research and talking to different people in this space. But fundamentally, some of the best insights come from those that have been there and done that are going through that change. And you only need one insight from, across 5 different people, and you've got an amazing you've got an amazing learning ability there. So
yeah, and it's none of this is right and wrong either. We're talking about sort of what's right for you and might not be right for somebody else. So conversation is the only way really to find that. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. And you know what? I think what's behind all of what we do at Gen CFO is actually giving people the confidence to move forward. And what I mean by that is a lot of the feedback that we get from our Gen CFO North and South is that it's like therapy. It's like that I'm talking to other people, and it just feels like therapy because they're going through this as well, and I can't talk to my partner about this. I don't understand the pressures I'm under, blah, blah, blah. And whether it's like Burnt on the summit saying you need to feel the pain, this is difficult, and then you sort of understanding that and that resonating with you and feeling motivation and confidence from that, or whether it's having a glass of wine with someone quietly at the meetups saying my boss is an idiot, he doesn't understand anything about transformation, which happens a lot as well. Let's sort of say that those anecdotal conversations. I think it's all about giving people confidence to make the change, and that there's no apology in being in that situation because we don't have any formal training on this. Yeah, we most of us haven't been to management consulting school. We haven't done our MSP, managing successful program work, or change management work, or some of us might have done prints, but that's not really what we're talking about here. So yeah, I think that's what community can give you: answers and a bit of confidence.
And that is a lovely way to describe the community, and I think there is a huge value in one, like you say, knowing that someone else is in the boat with you. They're rowing through that same storm. But also, I think there is something for a lot of the top level, the theoretical stuff is applied in really good environments where everything is working well. The strategy's there, the people are on board, all of these kind of things. And actually, what is lovely about what you've just said, Chris, is that peer learning allows you to connect with people that might have the same challenges as you, and be able to learn from that. Or maybe just, like you say, get some therapy. Maybe you should rename those meetups to therapy sessions by the sound of things.
I don't know who would turn up.
I think you might get a few more, Chris.
Yeah, might have to have a doorman. But, yeah.
Oh dear. Brilliant. Well, as usual, we have rapidly run out of time, Chris, but I want to say thank you for sharing some of the learnings from the summit, sharing your thoughts on what's happening in finance and how people can enable their teams. If people want to know more about the summit, more about Gen CFO, where is the best place to find you guys?
So it's generationscfo.com. That's probably the best place to me. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find the summit through the website, but if you just Google Gen CFO Summit, I'm sure you'll find it as well. But yeah, and obviously if they want to see whether you won the Digital Finance Function Awards in a couple of weeks, 15th of June, then have a look for that, Digital Finance Function Awards, and we'll be announcing all that after the event.
Yeah, exciting. Well, if anyone's listening to this, please keep your fingers crossed for both the podcast and our financial transformation live sessions. Thanks again, Chris. Really appreciate the nominations, and look forward to seeing you in person at the event.
Yeah, look forward to it. Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Chris. And for anyone that's listening that wants to learn more, we'll of course, as usual, put those links in the podcast. If you've got any feedback on today's session or any of the previous podcasts, please do, as usual, feel free to reach out to me, or directly message me on LinkedIn. It'd be lovely to hear from you. And thanks again, Chris, and look forward to seeing you guys next time on the podcast.